Mr. Chair, I very much agree that Ukraine needs to be the focus, very much. I represent a riding that at least 1 in 4, if not more, of my constituents are of Ukrainian descent, and some are very first-generation Ukrainian. A very dear friend of mine. I also have a large Polish, actually the most Polish folks of Polish descent out of any riding in Canada is in my riding. And a very dear friend of mine, his nephew was killed within the first couple of weeks of the war in Ukraine. He was 26. And there are a number of family members that have been killed in the war in Ukraine with relations in my riding. I represent them when I am in Parliament, and I cannot see anything more important for the Foreign Affairs Committee to be studying or to be focused on than the war in Ukraine right now, and how Canada can play a greater role in supporting them. And further, how we can ensure that our allies, and we can be reaching out to our allies, that they also provide more resources and more support to Ukraine. I do receive, I have to say, considerable amount of comments from my Ukrainian constituents with concern that the Liberal government is not providing enough defense supplies to Ukraine, that they were very late to the game. I think that is clearly something that this committee and the Defense Committee as well should be reviewing, why it took so long to send military defense. That is consistently a piece of information and feedback I receive from my Ukrainian constituents. So perhaps the committee would wish to discuss that in their study or in a future study so that that mistake is not made in the future and perhaps lives could be saved. I think something I found very personally alarming when the war in Ukraine broke out was there was a young member of parliament. She's about my age. She's an opposition MP as well. And her name is Kira Riddick. And she was photographed. She shared something on Twitter to the effect that said, a few days ago I was a normal legislator and now I'm fighting for the freedom of my country. And she was photographed with a firearm, a very large firearm. And I will never in my life, for as long as I live, get that image and her tweet out of my head. It was the most relatable moment I had felt concerning a war in a country that we call allies, that we call friends, and a woman just like me who is at her job just like we are right now, and then to think in just a few days taking up arms to defend your homeland, I think is possibly one of the most shocking and disturbing and scary things that I could think of. But I very much support her and the efforts of women there to stand their ground and to defend their homeland and their sovereignty against an aggressor. And I think actually obviously President Zelensky, and there's many male leaders in Ukraine and as well involved in this, but I would say that their women are really shining as well. And if we look to the Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna Marin, who is 34 years old when she was first elected as the Prime Minister of Finland, she is now, I believe, 37, 38, very young, one of the youngest world leaders in the world right now. She is very boldly and very bravely following many decades of neutrality with NATO, putting their country forward to join NATO. They share a very, very long border with Russia, and to see a young woman that's similar age to me with that sort of that gumption and that bravery to stand up to one of the most intimidating authoritarian figures in modern times is also incredibly inspiring as a woman politician. And I just very much applaud the Prime Minister of Finland as well as the Prime Minister of Sweden for standing up to bullies, so to speak, and pursuing a NATO membership. And I very much support the Canadian government in supporting those initiatives from the Prime Minister of Finland and of Sweden. And our leader, I think she's been very eloquent on putting on the record in the House of Commons in the Chamber about how important it is that Canadians and members of Parliament understand the severity of what's going on. She said a quote that I thought, really, I remember when she said it, it gave me goosebumps. She was talking to President Zelensky when he'd come virtually to the chamber. And she said to him, and I'll just quote her speech, "The kind of leadership that you are showing, sir, is very rare. And it serves as an inspiration to all of us who are elected. You are the leader of Ukraine for such a time as this, and we remain indebted to you." And when she said that, and again, we're looking at, I just mentioned Prime Minister Marin and the Swedish Prime Minister, whose name escapes me at the moment, in looking at many of these leaders, MP Riddick, the opposition MP in Ukraine, and to me, I just continue to think of, should Canada ever face, like, God help us, but should ever face something like this, like, would I be brave enough to do what the Ukrainians are doing. Would you be brave enough, Mr. Chair? Would our Prime Minister, would our leader of the Conservative Party? I hope so. I think we would all hope that we would be. But I think, like our leader had said, it is extremely rare. To see this. And I think President Zelensky's leadership and bravery will stand the test of time for being one of the most brave leaders in the Western world in the 21st century. And again, I think on the issue of Ukraine and the importance of this committee ensuring that it focuses on Ukraine, again, everyone has seen the images, and it's so strange to think that my constituents one day were visiting their families in Ukraine, that their families were coming here to visit us, they were breaking bread, and then we see in Instagram, there's so many videos, and I actually had to stop watching them because of how alarming they were. But you see families huddled in bomb shelters and ruined children's hospitals and maternity wards and dead bodies in the streets and women who were raped and people who were shot in the back of the head and just absolutely barbaric war practices that I don't think any of us ever anticipated we would be seeing. And to think that the individuals in Ukraine those are related to the constituents I represent. When I was asked to join the Foreign Affairs Committee today to talk about the importance of this committee focusing on Ukraine, I absolutely took up the opportunity, given how close to home this is for the people I represent. And again, I think we're seeing the global order shift, and that's why Foreign Affairs, more than almost any other committee, should be extensively studying Ukraine. And then I would hope to see that they study what is Canadians' position in the international order, how has it changed relative to the Russian aggression and that posture, as well as what we're seeing with Finland and Sweden. I think that certainly would warrant likely a committee study, and how, again, Canada is looking at its Arctic. In National Security and Public Safety Committee, I ensured to put forward a motion of study that we're studying right now to review Canada's ability to defend itself against Russian aggression should the worst happen. Now, of course, it's highly unlikely, but I think regardless, our duties as legislators is to ensure that...
Point of order goes to relevance again. We are hearing a very interesting work that Madame has been doing in another committee, which is not our committee. I understand that Canada must prepare itself for any eventuality, and I agree with her, but this is not at all related to the motion before us today, which is dealing with reproductive rights of women, 51% of the population, Chair, nor with the proposed amendment as moved by the Conservatives. This is really not in the context and is therefore not relevant. I must say that I feel that Ms. Dancho is trying to keep us on the Ukraine theme, which is one of the central elements to the motion regarding the proposed adjournment as proposed by Mr. Janusz. Yes, I have been following that, but now we're talking about the article. Yes, but I think that it's more a point of view, and sure you will have an opportunity to express your point of view later on because you are on the speaker's list. So, Ms. Dancho, would you like to continue and be as close to the theme of the motion presented by your colleague as possible? It would be very much appreciated.
Mr. Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the adjournment motion is we are debating whether we should be adjourning because we should be focusing on Ukraine. I think it would be very odd that we wouldn't be talking about the Canadian foreign affairs context and our ability to defend ourselves given Ukraine. I can't think of really anything more relevant given that the Russian aggression has had all countries in the world, I would think, having to review their own national security abilities. And the eye roll I just saw from the members opposite, I think, is a bit disrespectful. And I would just ask that if you don't agree, okay, go ahead.
Point of order. What is disrespectful is coming to this committee as a substitute and insisting that what we are doing is talking about the agenda of the committee. We are not talking about the agenda of the committee. We are talking about a motion to be considered for the agenda of the committee. That is what is disrespectful.
With all due respect, Mr. Oliphant, that's not a point of order. Ms. Dancho, would you like to continue?
Absolutely. Again, on the National Security and Public Safety Committee, the reason we began the study to review the security posture concerning Russian aggression is that Canada shares a very, very long Arctic border with the Arctic Ocean and Russia, and they have numerous military bases, in 19. They have over 40 icebreakers, most of them nuclear powered. And to think that any member of parliament doesn't believe that concerning what is happening in Ukraine does not impact the security posture of Canada, perhaps is not fully aware of the magnitude of the situation going on in Ukraine and how it impacts Canadians and the conversations parliamentarians should be having to ensure not only are we supporting our Ukrainian allies, but we are ensuring that we are doing everything we can at home. We can even talk about cybersecurity. Ukraine has experienced significant cybersecurity attacks and threats from Russia. Actually, Canada, who overall does quite well with cybersecurity compared to others, is actually lending support to Ukraine. That may be an issue that this committee would like to review as well, considering the cybersecurity field is growing in importance in terms of its threat to critical infrastructure, to hospitals, to in Canada's context, to CRA, to global affairs. We're seeing considerable security threats to cybersecurity. I'm very glad and proud that Canada was able to provide expertise to Ukraine in this regard. I would also say that the study at SECU, at the National Security and Public Safety Committee, is relevant to this discussion to underline the importance of staying on the study of Ukraine, and because of the infrastructure that we're looking at in the Canadian context, if we do want to talk about the threat that Russia has on the rest of the Western world, and we're looking at our surveillance technology in Canada, we can talk about NORAD, which is about 4 decades old and has not been updated in quite some time. So again, when we're talking about the invasion of Ukraine, we also have to be reviewing as parliamentarians our ability to defend ourselves should the worst happen, however unlikely. And so we've had numerous leading academic and national security experts underline this position quite clearly, that it would be foolish for parliamentarians not to take this seriously in the Canadian context of what's happening in Ukraine. Not only do we need to focus, Mr. Chair, on supporting our Ukrainian allies, we also need to focus on ensuring Canada is prepared for a cyber attack, for attack on our critical infrastructure. In fact, when I was briefed by the cybersecurity officials of public safety, they said that the worst like the Pearl Harbor event, I asked, what would be the worst thing that could happen? And they said an attack on our critical pipeline infrastructure. So these are the type of conversations we need to be having, both at Foreign Affairs, at National Security and Public Safety Committee. And I've been very pleased but alarmed to hear the testimony from leading national security advisors. Again, I think everyone recognizes, however unlikely, it is very important that we have these discussions. And I think what we're seeing as well when we talk about Ukraine is that a lot of our allies are leading the way in providing arms and support. The Americans, of course, have provided billions and billions of dollars. I heard one statistic that the amount, I think it was, I want to say 21 billion of arms they've committed. And various defense technologies and tools is more than the entire Ukrainian federal budget. So that gets considerable, and perhaps that's something this committee would also like to look at, perhaps, or perhaps defense committee, of what kind of arms are being provided. Why is Canada providing what it is? Are we providing everything that we can? Unfortunately, I don't have the expertise to go into all of the technologies that Canada has in our arsenal and which ones that should be provided that have not yet been. But I do think that overall, this committee should be focusing on Ukraine. I very much appreciate the efforts of my fellow Conservative committee members for making this point very clear, and I look forward to their testimony and what they have to say. So thank you, Mr. Chair.